It's just a classic story.
The ultimate combination of sort of sex and death.
I think people find that endlessly fascinating.
It's a strange thing that Cleopatra, who's probably one of the most famous women in history, there is one gigantic misconception that she wasn't Egyptian. She was actually of Macedonian extraction, which means she was from that area of Macedonia in northern Greece. When Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world, his empire only hung on very briefly, and then it split up among several people who'd worked with him. And the most senior of all the people who'd worked with Alexander was a guy called Ptolemy. And the Ptolemies got Egypt, and they started a dynasty. Cleopatra, famously, was the last of them. Cleopatra ends up, as a young woman, 17, 18, in charge as a co-regent, a co-ruler of Egypt with her younger brother. Because she's co-ruling with her brother has the upper hand at the time when Caesar first appears in Alexandria in 47 BC. Caesar decides not to throw his lot in with Ptolemy, but to throw his lot in with Cleopatra instead. And it's Cleopatra who gets Roman backing. She knows that that's what she has to do, and so she sets about trying to seduce Caesar, and she effects that. In order to get to Caesar, Cleopatra, who at that stage was basically having to hide out in Egypt in her own country, she had to find a way of getting smuggled effectively into Caesar's presence. The way she did it was to be concealed, wrapped up inside a carpet. And she's taken in, and the carpet is unrolled, and out pops Cleopatra. I mean, it's such an irresistible image, but it also suggests that she, for all her tremendous sense of dignity, she's queen. She's so pragmatic, and that is a real character trait for Cleopatra. She does what she has to arrive at the desired end. She managed to exert some tremendous influence upon Caesar. Now, to get a grip on him, you had to have something pretty special. You had to have something pretty different. And almost everybody who reflects the light of Cleopatra, they reflect it with such brilliance that it suggests that she was something unique. Cleopatra's options were very limited because there was no way that Egypt could resist Roman power. And so she had to really find a way of doing business with the Romans. And she did business with Caesar, who was then the most powerful of all Romans. And she believed that he, as the founder of what she thought would be a dynasty, would be able to bequeath to her a son, and that she'd be able to get in there on the bloodline, and now she'd be there running the show. So there's poor Cleopatra in Rome as a kind of single parent in a way, with Caesar's bastard son, and then old Caesar goes and gets it, and gets assassinated. And of course she has to leave town. And she goes to Egypt, and she starts to rule Egypt with Caesarion as her co-regent. She knows that that is a completely temporary state of affairs, and that fairly soon the next big Roman is going to come knocking. And of course the next big Roman to come her way was Mark Antony. The beginning of the story that we think of as the story of Antony and Cleopatra comes more or less in the aftermath of the Armenian campaign, when Antony is persuaded in the winter to go back to the seat of power, to Alexandria.
A noble triumvirate announces the immediate departure from the city of his honor, Mark Antony. He will take up his seat in Alexandria as supreme governor of Egypt and the eastern provinces.
And greeted with unbelievable lavishness and excessive over-the-top luxury, gigantic banquets and pageants. And he goes the same way as Caesar had, of starting to just feel the lure, the draw of this, for a variety of reasons. I think the chief one being the buzz of Cleopatra. She exerts some special kind of gravitational force on men, and powerful men, and canny men who could normally see through all this kind of stuff. And I think it's partly because she probably was fairly clear about what she was. She didn't attempt to disguise the fact that she was ambitious. She made an open play of it.
If I must prostitute myself for the good of my country and my family, I will.
She said, I am ambitious, I'm the Queen of Egypt, I want to stay here, this is my dynasty, you can help me, let's do it together, let's rule the world together, and let's have fun doing it. Let's live while we're doing it. There's no question at all that it seduced Antony. Famously, there's a profile of Cleopatra on a coin which shows that she's actually got quite a big hooter, got quite a big nose, so she's not conventionally beautiful. But she's very clever. She speaks lots of languages. She's the first Ptolemaic pharaoh to speak ancient Egyptian. So she's super bright, super accomplished, brilliant singer, brilliant dancer, plays lots of instruments. obviously great at chit-chat and talk and schmoozing and all the rest of it. One has to suspect fabulous in bed. So quite a package, and capable of using all those things in a very concerted way. And pulled in the two biggest fish.
Antony.
Cleopatra.
What Cleopatra offered was the sense that you were to be worshipped as a god. Not almost as a god, as a god. And one of the things he did that winter, to the disgust of his chief of staff and the people supporting him in his army, was he basically just gave himself over to that Alexandrine life. That's the time they started their dining society, their banqueting society, which was called the Immortal Livers, Livers of Life. And what a great name. I think that tells you everything you need to know about what they felt they were celebrating in there. They were into carpe diem in a big way. And they were seizing every day, squeezing everything out of it, getting what they could.
Antony and Cleopatra are completely in love. I think almost that destructive love where I think he loves her so much that he's not doing the things that he should be doing, and they're spending so much time getting drunk and having all this great food and having these fantastic parties.
The great passage in Antony's life is that he goes from being a sort of archetype of the hurly-burly, rough, tough Roman soldier. Big carouser, big drinker. That's what he's known for. He's known for being a brawler. And you see again coins of him. He's got a boxer's face. He's a brawler, he's a fighter, he's big, he's physical. He allegedly drove a chariot drawn by 2 lions. He famously, there's one story that after a heavy night, he threw up into someone else's toga during the Senate while making a speech and then just continued. He was a hard-living kind of guy.
I'm afraid I drank rather too much. I could not get out of bed, no matter how hard I tried. I have the most shocking headache. So you must both speak very quietly, or I shall shatter into 1,000 little pieces.
Basically a real lad, and would have been regarded as a real type to admire and look up to by the Romans. And of course what's so strange is what happens to Antony is that he goes soft. All of those values he seems to deck, junk, throw away. And here's an interesting thing about Romans. Being too interested in sex is a sign that you're not a man. So for Antony to have been a shagger, that was okay once in a while, but the idea that you lay for hours in bed all weekend in soft sheets with this woman, small talk, pillow talk, you know, what happened to you, Antony, they'd all have been thinking. Where did you go wrong? Where did you lose it? He'd become effeminate himself through his involvement with Cleopatra. It's another of the things that alienates him from the Roman people.
Having rejected his loving wife Octavia, Mark Antony has coupled himself to the sorceress Cleopatra, promising her dominion of all Rome. He worships dogs and reptiles. He blackens his eyes with soot like a prostitute. He dances and plays the cymbals in vile Nilotic rites.
The cat was a very strong mythical figure in ancient Egypt as a symbol of somebody who is instantly attracted and yet unknowable at the same time. So she's a very enigmatic figure, and I think he just becomes terribly bewitched by that. She was also somebody who matched him drink for drink. They would go hunting together, they would do everything together. This was somebody who, it seemed to me, was a soulmate to him, and yet a soulmate who ran out on him in his absolute most perfect time of need at the Battle of Actium.
Actium is a colossal naval engagement off northwest Greece. Antony's army had been there for some time, and the navies draw up in the bay there, and famously what happens is that there's a standoff and they look at each other, and as the lines are about to engage, Cleopatra in her flagship just breaks through the opposition line, the line of Octavian's fleet, and just takes off into the Mediterranean. And Antony goes after her.
I think people find that a kind of a heartbreaking thing, that you could be that close to somebody and you could have the world at your feet, and then at that famous battle where she left him, she took 60 ships and left him, and Antony saw her leaving and dived overboard and swam after her boat, and then sat in the prow of her ship and looked back and watched his entire force be annihilated, 20,000 men.
And that, of course, remains one of the great imponderable whys of history, because he was nothing if not brave, Antony. But he absolutely leaves. He deserts. There's no other way of reading it or interpreting it. He leaves his army on land and he leaves his navy behind and he follows Cleopatra. He was a man who had followed his heart and destroyed his principles and is crushed by remorse at having done so. And the pathos of this great soldier who fought at Caesar's side, who won campaigns in Gaul, who's seen great military glory, who's been a consul of Rome, deserting his army to follow his Eastern wife. It couldn't be more of a fall from grace in Roman eyes.
It's suddenly not about emperors and kings and queens and empires and the size of it. It comes down to just your heart and love and what you will do for it and what it does to you, and and the decisions you make on that very kind of humane level can affect thousands and thousands of lives.
It's almost as if Antony has been taken out of this world and placed on another planet. He's lost, and the only thing he's now got left is the love of this woman. Everything else that would have defined him, he's jettisoned and thrown back into the sea in the Bay of Actium.
After Antony and Cleopatra defeated Actium, they retreated to Alexandria, and essentially at that point they knew it was only a matter of time before Octavian and his armies converged on Alexandria and defeated them. So what had been a very decadent court dedicated to the pleasures of life became a court dedicated to celebrating the arrival of death. So it became a very decadent, very debauched, very dark world that they lived in.
They now form a second dining society, and having been the immortal livers, they've now accepted that death is their destiny. There's a real sense that they're partying while the world is collapsing around them. Everybody knows the game is up, but you just go on having one last drink. And the Octavian machine is closing in, coming to the palace, demanding Antony. Antony, on his last night alive, has this ghostly hallucination of hearing a band coming through the streets of Alexandria, past the windows of the palace and then processing on. And he feels that it is the spirit of Dionysus, who's associated with music and wine and song, coming close to him and then deserting him, symbolizing and representing for Antony the loss of his association with being a god, the sudden need to confront his mortality, all on the night that he's preparing to die. Antony then appears to take his life in that way, and Cleopatra then follows him, having had to go through the experience of seeing him either die or dead, and then Cleopatra famously takes her own life. It's a symbolic end for her because it's a symbol that she's paraded as being a symbol of the cycle of life and death that ultimately results in her death. But again, it's the unforgettable image of Cleopatra's life, the moment of her death. And it's so tactile. Slithery, smooth snake and biting her on the breast. Cleopatra is clear that there's no possible destiny or future for her in Rome. She realizes that's a penny that only gradually drops because she believes that she can pull off the stunt one last time, the third time, with the third of the Roman trilogy. She can do Octavian as she did Antony and Caesar. She can seduce him too. She miscalculates. She can't. And as soon as she realizes that and meeting him, then she knows the jig is up and she takes her own life.
Now, fight.
But I think that Cleopatra goes on, like any great historical figure, she exists more as a myth than she does as a genuine historical personage. And the myth is what we've revisited in the 20th century.
People obviously, they have such a strong idea of what they want from Cleopatra, and a lot of people are like, Cleopatra's Elizabeth Taylor, surely.
It's just another interesting example of the way that the myth continues to evolve, get reused, and reflect contemporary concerns and contemporary preoccupations. And that's what history is for, in one way, and that's what history is always used for.